I never thought I'd find myself here, standing in front of the mirror, adjusting my dress for what felt like the 100th time. 10 years of marriage. 10 years of love, laughter, and building a life together with Mark. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of all of that, a celebration of us. But as I smoothed the emerald green fabric, the one Mark always said made my eyes shine, I couldn't ignore the feeling in my gut, like something wasn't quite right. Lately, he's been distant. Coming home late from work, his warm greetings replaced by distracted nods and mumbled hellos. I tried telling myself it was just work stress. His job at the law firm has always been demanding, but deep down, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, it was something more. But tonight, I told myself, wasn't about my doubts. It was about us, about the life we've built together, and about the future we're still planning. As I looked at the dresser drawer, I couldn't help but smile. Hidden inside was a surprise, a deed to our dream house. Mark and I had always fantasized about a lakeside home, imagining waking up to the sound of water lapping at the shore and the smell of pine trees. It had been our shared dream for years, something we always talked about on lazy Sundays. I'd found the perfect house, rustic, charming, and right by Lake Winnipock. It wasn't cheap, but I'd saved for years, determined to make this dream a reality. Tonight was going to be perfect. I'd planned everything, the dinner, the reveal. Everything to make him smile like he used to. As I finished applying my lipstick, a memory flashed in my mind, our wedding day. I remembered Mark standing at the altar, his hands shaking as he held mine, his eyes filled with love and unshed tears. We were so young back then, barely out of college, but we knew we were meant to be. Everyone thought we were rushing, but it didn't matter. We believed in each other. That memory always gave me strength, especially when things felt uncertain. Tonight, I wanted to remind us both of that love, the one that built our life together. Everything was ready. The dining table was set with our best china, candles waited to be lit, and the champagne chilled in an ice bucket. I wanted the evening to feel magical, like those early days when we couldn't stop smiling at each other. As I heard the key turn in the lock, my heart raced. I smoothed my dress one last time and put on my brightest smile. "Happy anniversary, honey," I called out as he stepped in. But when Mark's eyes met mine, I saw something I didn't expect, something that felt off. He looked handsome, as always, in his crisp blue shirt and dark slacks. For a moment, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Happy anniversary, Sarah," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. It wasn't the warm, lingering kiss I'd expected. It felt more like an obligation. As we sat down to dinner, I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling settling in my stomach. He seemed quiet, distracted, and distant. I kept telling myself it was just a long day at work. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. I tried to keep the conversation light, asking about his day and telling him about mine. But he only responded with short, distracted answers, barely touching his food. My heart ached, but I pushed through, determined to make this night special. As I began clearing the plates, he spoke, his voice oddly flat. "I have something for you," he said, pulling out a small velvet-lined box. My heart fluttered with excitement. "This is my last gift to you," he added softly, his words sending a chill down my spine. I reached for the box, my fingers trembling slightly. But as I started to untie the ribbon, Mark's hand shot out, stopping me. "Not yet," he murmured, his tone almost pleading. I laughed nervously, trying to lighten the mood. "Always the man of mystery," I teased, slipping the box into my purse. I thought maybe he had planned a surprise, but the tension in his eyes told a different story. I couldn't help but notice how often his gaze darted to my purse after that, like he was waiting for something, or dreading it. After dessert, I couldn't hold back my excitement any longer. It was time to share my surprise. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder containing the deed to our dream house. "Mark," I began, my voice trembling with emotion, "we've been dreaming about this for years. And now it's ours." I opened the folder, revealing the papers inside. "I bought us the lakefront house we've always wanted." I waited for his reaction. Happiness, surprise, maybe even tears. But instead, his face turned pale, and his hands began to shake. You bought a house?" Mark stammered, his voice barely audible. His reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of joy, I saw fear and guilt? I thought you'd be happy, I said, reaching for his hand. He flinched as if my touch burned him. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. I can't, he mumbled, his words trailing off. Then, out of nowhere, he lunged for my purse. I need to take this, he muttered, his hands reaching for the box he'd given me earlier. Alarm bells were ringing in my head now. I clutched the box tightly, pulling it away from him. Mark, you're scaring me, I said, my voice trembling. What's going on? Why are you acting like this? He wouldn't meet my eyes. Please, he begged, his voice breaking. Don't open it. Not now. But his desperation only fueled my determination. My hands shook as I tore off the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside were papers. Divorce papers. Neatly folded, waiting for my signature. Beneath them was an envelope with my name written in Mark's handwriting. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the papers. Divorce? This couldn't be real. Not after everything we'd been through. Not today. I looked up at Mark, tears streaming down my face. Why? I whispered, my voice breaking. Why today? Why like this? He wouldn't look at me. I didn't know how else to tell you, he said, his voice hollow. I didn't plan it this way. I'm sorry. Sorry? That was all he had to say. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My hands trembled as I picked up the envelope with my name on it. Mark sat across from me, head in his hands, as if the weight of his guilt was too much to bear. I need answers, Mark, I said, my voice wavering between anger and heartbreak. Why now? Why on our anniversary? Wasn't I worth more than this? He finally looked up, his eyes red and filled with something I couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe, or shame. I thought it would be easier this way, he said softly. I didn't think you'd, he stopped, his voice cracking. You didn't think I'd what? Care? Love you? Fight for us? I shot back, my words cutting through the suffocating silence. I could see him struggling, his guilt like a heavy cloud hanging over him, but it wasn't enough to dull the sharp pain in my chest. I clenched the envelope in my hand, my heart pounding as I prepared to read whatever explanation he had scrawled inside. Part of me didn't want to make it real, but I couldn't stop myself. The words on the page blurred as tears welled up in my eyes. Mark had written about feeling trapped, about how he'd been unhappy for years but didn't know how to tell me. I care about you, Sarah, the letter read, but I'm not in love with you anymore. Each word felt like a dagger, twisting deeper with every sentence. He went on to say he wanted me to find someone who could love me the way I deserved, as if that made this betrayal less painful. I looked up at him, shaking with anger. So, you just decided to rip my life apart? To throw everything away? He couldn't even meet my gaze. I'm sorry, he mumbled, but sorry wasn't enough to undo the devastation he had caused. My voice trembled as I demanded, why, Mark? Why do this now? Why on our anniversary of all days? He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. I didn't plan it this way, he muttered, his words hollow. I was going to leave the papers and go. But I didn't know how else to do it. His excuses only fueled my anger. You thought leaving divorce papers as a gift would be easier. I spat, disbelief and hurt dripping from my words. He flinched but said nothing, his silence louder than any apology he could muster. The room felt suffocating, the weight of his betrayal pressing down on me. You had months, Mark, I continued, my voice rising. Months to tell me the truth, to have an honest conversation. But instead, you waited until today to destroy everything we've built. His eyes glistened with guilt, but it wasn't enough to erase the agony coursing through me. I felt shattered, like my entire world had been a lie. As the silence stretched between us, I finally found the strength to ask the question I dreaded most. Is there someone else? My voice barely above a whisper, yet it seemed to echo in the room. Mark froze, his expression betraying him before his words did. It's not what you think, he began, his hesitation cutting deeper than any admission. Then what is it, Mark? Tell me the truth, I urged, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might shatter. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling. It's a man, Sarah. His name is David. His words hit me like a punch to the gut, leaving me reeling. A man, I echoed, unable to comprehend. Are you bisexual? He admitted quietly, his eyes finally meeting mine. I've known for a while, but I was too scared to face it. Meeting David, it made me realize I couldn't keep lying to myself, or to you. The room spun around me as I struggled to process his confession. My emotions collided, betrayal, anger, confusion, and an unexpected pang of sadness for the struggle he must have endured in silence. Why didn't you tell me, Mark? We could have faced this together. I cried, my voice breaking. But deep down I knew the answer. He had been too afraid to admit the truth, even to himself. I sat there, staring at Mark as his confession hung heavily in the air. My mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of our life that suddenly didn't fit. How long? I asked, my voice barely steady. He hesitated, then answered, 6 months. 6 months of lies, of sneaking around, of building a connection with someone else while I was holding on to the dream of us. My heart clenched, the betrayal slicing deeper than I thought possible. So, while I was planning our future, you were planning your escape. My voice cracked, raw with pain. Mark flinched, as though my words had physically struck him. I didn't plan for this to happen, Sarah, he said, his voice trembling. I fought it. I tried to bury it, to make us work, but I couldn't keep lying, to myself or to you. His words felt hollow, his regret too late to undo the damage. I stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. You didn't even give me a chance, Mark, I said, my voice shaking with both anger and grief. You made the choice for both of us without even letting me fight for what we had. The tears came then, hot and unrelenting, but I refused to let them drown me. Not this time. This wasn't just about his betrayal, it was about the trust he had shattered, the life he had dismantled without warning. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the whirlwind of emotions raging inside me. The room felt smaller, suffocating, as if the walls were closing in. Was it worth it? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Mark looked at me, his face a mixture of guilt and pain. I don't know, he admitted. I didn't want to hurt you, Sarah. I couldn't keep living a lie. His words felt like a slap, the truth cutting through me like a blade. I had spent years believing in us, in the life we were building together, and now he was telling me it had all been a facade. I shook my head, unable to comprehend the man sitting across from me. You owed me honesty, Mark. If you were struggling, you could have told me. We could have faced it together. Instead, you let me build a dream while you tore it down behind my back. My voice cracked, but I refused to look away. He dropped his gaze, shame flickering in his eyes. I was scared, he said softly. Scared of what it would mean, of losing you, of disappointing everyone. His admission stung, but it also revealed a glimpse of the turmoil he had been hiding. For a moment, the anger in me wavered, replaced by a deep sadness for the man who had felt trapped in his own skin. You didn't just lose me, Mark, I said, my voice quieter now. You lost the chance to face this with someone who loved you unconditionally. And that might be the biggest tragedy of all. As Mark's words hung in the air, I found myself sinking into a silence that felt heavier than anything I had ever known. It wasn't just about his betrayal anymore. It was about the years we had spent together, the life we had built, and the lies that had quietly threaded through it all. I thought back to the nights I'd stayed up waiting for him, to the small, stolen moments of joy we had shared, and to the future I had dreamed of so fiercely. It was like flipping through a photo album and realizing every picture had been edited, every memory tainted by a truth I hadn't known. I want to hate you, I said finally, my voice trembling with the weight of my pain. I want to scream at you and curse you for everything you've done. But I can't, Mark. Because some part of me still remembers the man I fell in love with. And it's that memory that's breaking me. Mark's eyes filled with tears, his own guilt and regret etched into every line of his face. I never wanted this, Sarah, he said quietly. I never wanted to hurt you, but I also couldn't keep pretending to be someone I'm not. His words struck a nerve, and I felt my anger waver, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. I realized that as much as I was a victim of his lies, he had also been a prisoner of them. And now, as we sat across from each other, stripped of everything we had once been, I understood one painful truth. We had both lost something irreplaceable. "I don't know how to forgive you," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "But I do know this: I have to let you go. For both our sakes." After Mark left that evening, the silence in the house felt deafening. Every room seemed to echo with memories of our life together. The laughter, the fights, the moments of quiet comfort. It was as if the walls themselves were mourning the end of an era. I sat on the couch, clutching a blanket around me, staring blankly at the divorce papers he had left behind. The legal words blurred together, meaningless in the face of what I was feeling. How could a decade of love and shared dreams be reduced to a few cold, typed sentences? I replayed our conversation over and over in my mind, dissecting every word, every glance. There was no solace in it, only a gnawing pain that refused to ease. And yet, somewhere in the depths of my heart, I recognized a flicker of understanding. Mark wasn't the villain I had wanted him to be. He was just a man searching for himself, lost in the process of trying to please everyone but himself. I hated him for what he had done, but I couldn't deny the truth. We had both been living a lie. And now, as I sat there alone, the enormity of what lay ahead began to settle in. This was the end of the life I had known, but maybe, just maybe, it could also be the beginning of something new. As dawn broke the next day, I found myself still awake, curled up on the couch with Mark's letter and the divorce papers scattered around me. The soft light of the rising sun painted the room in shades of gold and orange, a stark contrast to the heaviness in my heart. The future I had spent years building in my mind was gone, replaced by a blank slate that terrified me. I took a deep breath and stood up, my body aching from hours of stillness. With trembling hands, I gathered the papers, folded Mark's letter, and placed them in a drawer. I wasn't ready to face them again, but I couldn't let them consume me. This wasn't the time to collapse under the weight of my pain. It was the time to rebuild. For the first time in days, I showered, dressed, and stepped outside. The crisp morning air hit my face, and for a moment, I just stood there, breathing it in. The world hadn't stopped spinning, even if it felt like mine had. It was a small realization, but it planted a seed of strength within me. Life was still happening, and it was up to me to decide how I would face it. As I stood on the porch, staring out at the world that seemed so normal despite my shattered reality, I realized something profound. I had a choice. I could let this heartbreak define me, or I could redefine myself. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. With trembling resolve, I decided to take the first step forward. I pulled out my phone and called Lisa, my best friend, the one person I knew would listen without judgment. When she answered, her voice was warm and full of concern. "I'm coming over," she said before I could say much, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of comfort. While waiting for her, I began to tidy up the mess around the house. It wasn't just about cleaning, it was about reclaiming my space, my life. Each small action, folding a blanket, washing a dish, felt like a tiny victory, a declaration that I wouldn't let this pain consume me. By the time Lisa arrived with her ever-reliable coffee and an encouraging smile, I felt ready to talk, ready to take the next step, however small it might be. As Lisa and I sat on the couch, the warmth of the coffee between my hands felt grounding. I began to tell her everything: the anniversary dinner, the gift box, the divorce papers, and Mark's revelation. The words tumbled out of me, raw and unfiltered. She listened, her expression shifting between anger, sadness, and fierce loyalty. "You've been through hell, Sarah," she said when I finished, her voice steady but full of emotion. "But look at you. You're still here. You're still standing." Her words stirred something deep within me, a spark I hadn't felt in days. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was stronger than I thought. Lisa suggested we take a walk by the lake, and though my first instinct was to resist, I agreed. As we stepped outside, the crisp air filled my lungs, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. We walked in silence at first, the sound of the gentle waves lapping against the shore filling the space between us. "This isn't the end for you, Sarah," Lisa said finally, her voice quiet but firm. "It's just a new chapter. And I'll be here every step of the way." Her words, paired with the serenity of the lake, felt like a lifeline, pulling me out of the darkness and into a faint light of possibility. After my walk with Lisa, something shifted within me. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel entirely consumed by the weight of my broken marriage. Her words echoed in my mind, "This isn't the end, it's a new chapter." That night, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table with a pen and a blank journal in front of me. I stared at the empty page for what felt like hours, the silence of the house pressing down on me. Finally, I began to write. At first, the words were hesitant, almost fragile. I wrote about the betrayal, the pain, and the anger that felt too big to hold inside. Then I wrote about the love Mark and I had shared, the moments that had been real, and the dreams that had once united us. As the words poured out, a sense of clarity began to emerge. This wasn't just about documenting my pain, it was about understanding it, making sense of how I had arrived here and what I could learn from it. Slowly, the writing turned from recounting the past to imagining the future. What did I want my life to look like now? What dreams were truly mine, untethered from the version of myself I had built with Mark? The journal became my sanctuary, a place to be raw and unfiltered. It didn't matter if the words were messy or imperfect, they were mine. Each entry felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, a step toward rebuilding not just my life but my identity. By the time I closed the journal that night, my tears had dried, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a flicker of hope. It was small, fragile, but it was there. A reminder that even after the darkest nights, the sun will always rise. The next morning, I woke up feeling different. It wasn't as if the pain had disappeared, it was still there, lurking in the background like a dull ache. But alongside it was something new, a sense of purpose, no matter how faint. I found myself craving something I hadn't felt in weeks: movement, action, progress. So, instead of sitting with my coffee in silence, I put on my running shoes and stepped outside. The crisp morning air filled my lungs as I started walking along the lake. The stillness of the water mirrored my thoughts, calm on the surface but with ripples of change beginning to stir. As I walked, I started noticing things I hadn't before: the way the sunlight danced on the rippling waves, the faint sound of birds chirping in the distance, the smell of fresh pine in the air. For the first time in months, I was truly present in the moment. Afterward, I decided to tackle something I had been avoiding: the clutter left in Mark's absence. His clothes, his books, even the mug he used to drink coffee from, it all sat like a shrine to a life I no longer lived. With a deep breath, I began packing his things into boxes. Each item I picked up brought a wave of memories, some sweet, some bitter, but instead of letting them overwhelm me, I let them pass. It wasn't about erasing him or our history, it was about creating space for myself. As I packed the last box, I realized that letting go wasn't just about the physical things. It was about the emotional baggage too. Mark was a part of my story, but he didn't define it. I wasn't just someone's wife. I was Sarah, a woman with her own dreams, her own pain, and her own strength. The realization felt like a small victory, a quiet triumph. That day, as I carried the boxes to the garage, I wasn't just clearing the house, I was making room for me. As I stood on the porch, the late afternoon sun painted the lake in shades of gold and amber. This place, once filled with the shadows of heartbreak, now felt like a sanctuary. The months had been hard, painful even, but each step, every tear, and every moment of self-reflection had brought me closer to a version of myself I never knew existed. I had rediscovered my strength, my passions, and my voice. The house was now truly mine. The walls no longer echoed with the past but resonated with new memories I was creating. The art studio, filled with my paintings, stood as a testament to my resilience. The pages of my novel, now nearing completion, told a story of hope and survival. Each stroke of paint and every word written was proof that I could build something beautiful out of the ashes of what once was. Mark and I had spoken for the last time a few weeks ago. It was a conversation filled with closure and understanding. There were no lingering resentments, just a shared acknowledgement that our paths had diverged. He wished me happiness, and for the first time, I felt like I could genuinely wish the same for him. The future stretched out before me, unknown and untamed. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I had learned that life rarely goes according to plan, but that doesn't mean it can't be beautiful. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I whispered to the evening sky, "Here's to new beginnings." And this time, I meant it with every fiber of my being. My journey wasn't over, it was just beginning. And I was ready to embrace it, one step, one day, and one dream at a time.